Today, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has proposed hosting the COP33 in India during his opening address at COP28 summit in UAE. It is quite evident that India is fast taking center stage to fight climate change and reach net zero targets. India's G20 theme, the One World, One Family, One Future, has resonated with the world, where India has proposed green financing initiative to support the developing nations. From non-fossil fuels to lifestyle for sustainable development, Bharat continues to show the world the way towards a greener, sustainable planet. India has also called for the developed world to contribute generously to the Loss and Damage Fund to the tune of trillions of dollars to support the Global South and the developing nations that are part of Global South. Now, here's what the Prime Minister said during COP28 opening address.
Friend, Bharat UN फ्रेमवर्क फॉर क्लाइमेट चेंज प्रोसेस के प्रति प्रतिबद्ध है। इसलिए आज मैं इस मंच से 2028 में COP33 में COP33 समिट को भारत में होस्ट करने का प्रस्ताव भी रखता हूं।
All right, now I have with me on the telecast Margaret McLeod. She is the US State Department spokesperson for Hindi, and getting to know her views on behalf of United States of America. Let's start that conversation. Good to have you, Margaret, on the telecast with us. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए। Margaret, आपसे पहला क्वेश्चन मैं पूछूंगी कि यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका का क्या रिएक्शन है। प्राइम मिनिस्टर नरेंद्र मोदी ने आज प्रपोज किया है कि COP33 इंडिया में होस्ट हो।
अच्छा, मैं वो होस्टिंग का फैसला के बारे में कोई खास ऐलान नहीं है, लेकिन हमने वाज़े तौर पर सुना प्रधानमंत्री मोदी से कि वो ये माहौलियाती तब्दीली के मसला का एक हल का हिस्सा बनना चाहते हैं। अमेरिका भी हल का हिस्सा बनना चाहते हैं और हम इंडिया के साथ सहयोग करने के लिए तैयार हैं।
बिल्कुल। यहाँ पे कल एक बड़ा डेवलपमेंट हुआ, बिग डिसीजन। यहाँ पे लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड का अप्रूवल हुआ है COP28 समिट पर। यहाँ पे ये जो लॉस एंड डेवलपमेंट फंड है, किस चीज़ के लिए यूटिलाइज होगा? प्राइम मिनिस्टर नरेंद्र मोदी ने भी अभी कहा है कि ये मिलियंस और बिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर्स की जगह इसका जो फंड क्रिएट करना चाहिए, इकट्ठा करना चाहिए, ये ट्रिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर्स के ट्यून में होना चाहिए। यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स का इसमें क्या कंट्रीब्यूशन है? अब का कंट्रीब्यूशन इन फ्यूचर, व्हाट इज द रोड मैप?
जी, अमेरिका ये लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड की बात के बारे में बहुत एक्साइटेड है और अगरचे में आज कोई संख्या के ऐलान नहीं है, हमारी उम्मीद है कि हर एक देश इस फंड के कंट्रीब्यूशंस का एम्बिशन बढ़ाए और हम एक पूरे समाज का एफर्ट चाहिए जिनमें न सिर्फ सरकार बल्कि गैर सरकारी इदारे और निजी शोबे से भी कंट्रीब्यूशंस हो सके।
जी बिल्कुल। यहाँ पे एक बात जो बार बार इसका प्रपोजल इनिशिएटिव दिया है, इंडिया ने इसके आगे आके पहल दिखाई है। जब G20 इंडिया प्रेसिडेंसी हो रही थी, वहाँ पर ग्रीन फाइनेंसिंग, क्लाइमेट फाइनेंसिंग की बात हुई है, टेक्नोलॉजिकल ट्रांसफ़र टू डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज़ जो कि ग्लोबल साउथ में हैं, उनकी बात हुई है। और फिर से प्राइम मिनिस्टर नरेंद्र मोदी ने अपनी ओपनिंग स्पीच COP28 पर इसका विस्तार से बात की है। इस प्रपोजल के प्रति G28 में क्या और डेवलपमेंट्स होंगी? कौन देशों से इसको एडवांटेज मिलेगी?
देखिए, अमेरिका देखते हैं कि ये जलवायु परिवर्तन के असरात ना सिर्फ अमेरिका पर होते हैं बल्कि पूरी दुनिया पर हो रहे हैं और हम देखते हैं कि उभरती हुई अर्थव्यवस्था पर कोई खास बोझ हो रहा है। उसका जवाब के लिए हमारे राष्ट्रपति बाइडेन ने एक प्रेसिडेंट्स इमरजेंसी प्रोग्राम फॉर रिलीफ और एडेप्टेशन अनाउंस की, जो मल्टी बिलियन डॉलर एफर्ट है ताकि हम इंसानी इमदाद ऑफर कर सकते हैं और एडेप्टेशन असिस्टेंस भी कर सकते हैं। और इस COP28 में ये लॉस एंड डैमेजेस फंड में भी हम बहुत एक्टिवली पार्टिसिपेट करना चाहते हैं। और हम इंडिया के साथ अलग अलग शोबे में इस मामले पे तावन करना चाहते हैं।
जी, एक बड़ी टिप्पणी आती है, चाहे वो COP26 हो, COP27 या अब COP28 हो, जहाँ पे बोला जाता है कि इंडिया, चाइना, ग्लोबल साउथ की कंट्रीज, डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज का जो एक्सप्लॉयटेशन, एक्सट्रीम एक्सप्लॉयटेशन ऑफ नेचर जो कि लास्ट सेंचुरी से हुआ है, इसमें कोई योगदान नहीं है। ये जो वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज़ हैं, यूरोपियन, अमेरिकन कंट्रीज़ हैं, उनका ज़्यादा ये योगदान हुआ है पिछली एक सेंचुरी में। पर अब एवरीबडी हैज़ टू कम टुगेदर एंड जॉइन हैंड्स। अब सारे देशों को पूरे वर्ल्ड में इस ये जो क्लाइमेट चेंज का ये जो ग्लोबल क्राइसिस है उसको फाइट करने के लिए दोबारा आना पड़ेगा। क्या आपको लगता है कि वेस्टर्न वर्ल्ड को इसकी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ज़्यादा लेनी पड़ेगी?
देखिए, जैसे आपने कहा, ये मसला ऐसा है जो कोई एक ग्रुप नजरअंदाज नहीं कर सकते हैं। और आप पिछले महीने आपने देखा पड़ा कि वो सनी लेंस स्टेटमेंट थे अमेरिका और चीन के बीच में, जिनके तहत हमारे अग्रीमेंट हुआ कि हमारे स्टॉक टेक में हम मीथेन भी शामिल करेंगे। सो हम ढूंढ रहे हैं हम कैसे कोऑपरेट कर सकते हैं और हम कैसे हमारी काबिलियत के मुताबिक और कर सके।
जी बिल्कुल। मार्गरेट, अगर देखा जाए इसमें कंसेंसस होना बहुत ज़रूरी है। COP28 में क्या ऐसी नई तब्दीलियां हम देख सकते हैं एज़ कम्पेयर टू द गोल्स जो हमने सेट किए थे COP27 में? क्या हम वो इम्प्लीमेंट कर पाए हैं एक साल के अंदर? और ऐसे कौन से डिसीजंस लिए जा सकते हैं ताकि हमारे जो नेट ज़ीरो का टारगेट है पूरे ग्लोब में ये पूरा हो सके?
देखिए, अभी हम पेरिस एग्रीमेंट की शुरुआत से उसका 2030 साल का लक्ष्य तक अभी हाफवे जगह पर है, आधे जगह पर है। और इसलिए हमारे एजेंडे पर 3 अहम महत्वपूर्ण विषय है जो अभी इस रास्ते पर हम कहाँ पे हैं, मतलब यानी ये ग्लोबल स्टॉक टेक एक्सरसाइज है। फिर हमारे लक्ष्य तक पहुंचने के लिए क्या क्या काम जरूरी है, या हमारी प्रोग्राम ऑफ वर्क होगा, और आखिरकार ये जरूरी काम करने के लिए हम कैसे पैसे मिल सके। आप जैसे आपने जिक्र किया ये लॉस एंड डैमेज फंड, और हम कैसे ये वसाइल मोबिलाइज कर सके। सो हम ये 3 विषय पर खास ध्यान रख रहे हैं इस COP28 में। और हम काफी पेचीदा दुनिया में रह रहे हैं, हर साल सूरत हाल बदलते रहते हैं। लेकिन अच्छी बात यह है कि न सिर्फ सलामती सूरत हाल और मुआशी सूरत हाल, बल्कि साइंस की तरक्की होती है, टेक्निकी की तरक्की होती है, और हम ये एडवांसेस लेवरेज करके जहां तक मुमकिन है हमारे एम्बिशन और बढ़ाना चाहे।
जी बिल्कुल। आपसे आखिरी सवाल मार्गरेट कि इट्स एन अलार्मिंग सिचुएशन, जो हमारा गोल था, पूरे विश्व का गोल था कि नेट ज़ीरो के टूवर्ड्स हम सारे इकट्ठे मूव हों, यूनाइटेडली मूव हों, उसका जो टारगेट्स थे उससे हम काफ़ी पीछे हैं। तो ये जो गैप अब बन चुका है, इसको किस तरह से रिड्यूस किया जाएगा?
हम समझते हैं कि ये चर्चा जो हो रहा है राजनीति में काफी मुश्किल है। लेकिन अगर हम अपने देश का मिसाल पेश करें तो हमने कानून के जरिए से काफी इन्वेस्ट किया हमारे इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में, हमारे इन्फ्लेशन रिडक्शन एक्ट के जरिए हम नई टेक्निकी रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट में इन्वेस्ट कर रहे हैं, और ये नई टेक्नोलॉजी और अफोर्डेबल होने के लिए काफी निवेश कर रहे हैं। और अमेरिकी की हैसियत से मैं इतना ही कह सकती हूँ कि हमारे 2005 के एमिशन लेवल्स अदा करने के लिए ऑन ट्रैक है 2030 तक।
Okay, all right. Thank you, Margaret McLeod, for joining me on the telecast. शुक्रिया आपका बहुत बहुत हमारे साथ बात करने के लिए. Okay, let's carry forward this conversation. We're talking about COP28, and it is all important and imperative that India at this point of time takes the lead. That has been the reiteration that has been made by the Prime Minister today as well at the summit in UAE. Joining me also on the telecast is Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee. I have with me other guests as well. I'm going to get them on board one after another. Do we have Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee? Okay, quickly then bringing in Gautam Mukherjee. Gautam, when the opening comments of the Prime Minister start with telling the world that our carbon emissions are less than 4%, that obviously gives a strong statement to the world of where India stands vis-a-vis the rest, particularly the global West.
Yeah, it's impressive considering that we are the most populous country in the world. However, our emissions are nowhere near as high as America's, for example, and China as well. And most of the people who emit the most are very reluctant to cut back on items that do all the emitting. Whereas in India, we've been very active, particularly on solar energy, which is likely to be ramped up further in the coming years. And also, we have developed our own nuclear reactors, which are smaller than the ones that are imported, within our control. We have commissioned one or two already and have plans to commission many more. We do not suffer from the sort of reluctance to incorporate nuclear power as part and parcel of this. We have made a very good attempt to lead the Global South in the G20 recently concluded, and in the I2U2, we are partners with the UAE amongst others, who are a little embroiled like Israel at the moment, but they'll come around. But we are making progress into a world which is likely to depend less on fossil fuel and more on new technologies and old technologies like nuclear power, as well as hydrogen. And in all of this, India is trying to forge a position that is not only positive, but could be considered by some as a position of leadership. We've done that in all the Paris conferences. We're doing it again now in Dubai.
Absolutely.
Megha.
Absolutely. Sumit, an overarching theme that has been taken by the Global South, particularly India, with support of China, that's quite the rarity that happens, is the fact that, and I was asking this also to Margaret here, talking about how in the past century, the destruction of nature by way of unburdened exploitation that has done by the West is it should not be the responsibility. It is not the doing of the Global South. It is not the reason it's not the reason for the Global South, for the developing nations to bear the burden of it. Unfortunately, they are doing that. Therefore, shouldn't the responsibility proportionately lie on the Western countries in Europe and in America to be largely responsible in fighting these carbon emissions and the climate change that we are seeing for the past few decades now?
Megha ji, thanks for having me on your show. In fact, the problem here is, you see, today, you cannot have apples and oranges in the same basket. we have to develop, our economies have to develop. The cost of climate change cannot be similarly, it cannot be divided by the number of countries. It should be divided as per the percentage of emission. For example, we in India, we are 1.45 billion, 42 billion people. We contribute only 4% of the global carbon emissions. Look at China, exactly the same population, 26%. So how is the onus on India and China going to be the same? It has to be determined by the proposition of the emission which you are contributing to the world. If there's money, if there are norms, if there is a price, China has to bear the 26% of the cost. As per us, we are 20% of the population. We are doing just 4% of the emissions. So likewise, as Zambia cannot bear the same cost what an United States of America can bear, because they have their development, they have developed their things. Now the onus on climate change cannot be on us, because whenever it was your time, you polluted the earth most. You are still polluting the earth most. Why doesn't anybody question People's Republic of China? Even in China today, 62% of the power is coal-fired. Do you believe it? 62% of the power is coal-fired. CCP controls the coal and controls the output price of a power. China has access to the nuclear fuels. Why doesn't China go, nuclear powered? Now, if I compare a China with a France, where approximately 32 to 38% of energy is nuclear powered, why is China still on 62%? What happened to the Paris Accord? Why is onus only on India to, adhere to all the norms? In fact, we are doing much better. We are the number one producer of solar energy. We have honored all the commitments of our Paris Accord. We are part of the Biofuels Alliance, Solar Alliance. We have done so many things to reduce the greenhouse emission gases. Look at our development. Xavier Airport is going to be one of the top 3 biggest airports in the world. It is the first airport which is 100% carbon neutral. So we are showing that what the Honorable Prime Minister just now has tweeted, that economy with ecology can be sustained at the same time. But there's a cost of sustaining it. It's not that we are listening, we are doing it. We take all the cost, and our neighbor China is given a free hand. How come they have 26% of the emissions? And why China is not footing the bill for us? Why should a Zambia foot the bill for China's misdeeds? That is the question I'm asking.
Okay.
Do it as per your emission, not by the number of countries.
Fair enough. Ambassador Mukherjee, quickly, talking about how a proposal has been set by India, as in the speech that was made by Prime Minister Modi today at COP28 in Dubai, where green financing and technological transfer has to be given the priority. Is there a possibility that a consensus is finally drawn with all the nations that are attending COP28, and how advantageous is it going to be, particularly for developing nations?
Well, actually, Megha, throughout our G20 presidency, you would recall that we put high priority on climate change and how to control emissions. And as Sumit rightly pointed out just now, we have actually set an example in the manner in which an emerging economy has made its own sacrifices in order to become green. This despite the clear international understanding that those who were responsible in the first instance for this climate change crisis were supposed to bear the costs of developing and emerging countries as they emerge towards greener technologies. The costs were supposed to be shared in proportion to those who were primarily responsible for the climate change crisis. Instead of that, India, in fact, has shouldered its own burden, has provided leadership, was one of the first countries under Prime Minister Modi to set up the Solar Alliance. And today, in fact, we have been giving technological assistance to developing countries to develop their solar energy, in which we are far, far ahead. I would say that given the high respect that we have on this issue, and given the fact that major emerging countries support our perspective, as well as the partnerships that we have, for instance, with France, etc., on the Solar Alliance, I am sure that India, under Prime Minister Modi, will play an extremely important role in the negotiations to reach towards a consensus, because the world cannot afford anything but a consensus, because the fate of the planet depends on a consensus. So those who damaged earlier consensus by, for example, questioning that there is no climate change. If you remember, that it was earlier President Trump's stated position that there is no climate change. It's just a hoax. So these kind of doubters who exist in different parts of the world, particularly in the United States, if they are in a state of denial today, the planet will pay the cost. So India definitely will show the way ahead, but everybody should follow India because the survival of the planet depends on the success of this crucial conference. Megha.
Absolutely. Naresh Pant, talking about net zero goals, the world is far behind in achieving them in terms of the targets that had already been set. How far away are we from achieving the net zero goals as a world, as a one single united entity? How long is it going to take to fill that gap?
See, there is already a discussion on various aspects, which is intricately linked to the question which you asked me. But probably the most important aspect in this is the leadership position which India is taking in this. If I remember correctly, in COP26, India had announced certain goals, 500 gigaton of renewable energy, reduction of carbon. And at that time, I think 2070, we were supposed to, or we are going to reach the net zero target. By 2030, 50% reduction. I do believe that we are well on the path towards achieving that. We are actually slightly ahead in some of these respects. The issue becomes very complex, and at this point of time, India seeking the 2033 hosting of the COP conference is very significant, because this interplay of operationalizing the loss and damage fund will come more into focus. And as it has been pointed out, it is really complex. It is not a very straightforward number of people versus area versus country versus, it needs to be evaluated in a much more nuanced way to arrive at. So we will probably be, to come back to your question, we are probably on path correctly to reach 2070 net zero carbon targets.
Yeah.
However, the cost for that and operationalizing of the loss and damage fund will be a very important factor in next few years.
Okay. Gautam, it's also interesting to note in terms of how these COPs have taken place, these COP summits have taken place traditionally in Europe and US, Europe and North America, and there is this very tangible shift that has taken place where a lot of middle nations, the Middle East, South America, and now with India's proposal to host it in India in 2029 is reflective of the tectonic shift in way the global geopolitics works as well.
Well, it is a work in progress. You know, when you talk of 2030 and 2033, India's status is going to be very high by then. We are going to be number 3 economy for sure at that point in time, with probably a nominal GDP upwards of 10 trillion. Now, in this context where, if you like, the entire economic, economic power is shifting to South Asia, India in particular, possibly some of the others, small states which are friendly towards India, such as Bangladesh and now gradually Sri Lanka. All of this will participate in it. And countries like China, who are facing political headwinds as well as economic headwinds, will be much diminished even if they retain the number 2 spot in the overall order of things, which, you know, what you're getting is one country, India, is accelerating its growth. Another country, China, is decelerating its growth. Where this will intertwine and intersect remains to be seen in the coming years up to 2050. The concern about climate change is growing because people are feeling the effects. There's unseasonable rain, there's floods, there is very hot temperatures, very cold temperatures, and so on. So it's hard to ignore. Now, whether other countries who are in the thick of creating this mess in the first place, and it didn't happen overnight, are going to take any drastic steps, I have my doubts. But if a large number of not so important countries, it's not Europe, it's not America, but probably most of the rest of the world, if we adopt green technologies and green practices as much as possible, it will lay out a new benchmark, which I think the others will also begin to follow to a greater extent than they do at present. Megha.
Yeah, absolutely. A quick word from you, Sumit, that the situation when it comes to achieving net zero targets, there have been a number of commitments that have been already made by India, as in the speech of the Prime Minister, and particularly the focus on creation of and usage of non-fossil fuels, whether it is the India Solar Alliance that was announced in Glasgow, whether we talk about green hydrogen or we talk about electric vehicles. It's very important to see India as the emerging epicenter of it.
You see, Megha ji, India has taken initiatives which are far beyond our call of duty. We are in fact leading the world. I'll tell you, if you look at the Solar Alliance, we've talked of the Solar Alliance. If you look at the solar energy produced, we are number one. If you look at the number of solar panels produced, there was a time we were importing from China. Now, number third and number fourth plant in the terms of capacity are in India. If you look at the hydrogen technology, we are number one. If you look at the hydrogen technology for trains, we have started the technology. Hydrogen fuel cell, we have already buses, cars and all running. If you look at the electrodes for this, we are the one who are even exporting the electrodes to United States of America. Now, if I go from hydrogen to, if I go to this biofuels alliance, it was done during the G20. If you look at all the renewable sources of energy, India has taken the lead in all the spheres. And if you look at our development, we are doing development with keeping in mind the ecology and yet keeping the cost low.
Absolutely.
No, and important thing is today I was very happy when the Honorable Prime Minister just tweeted, we are the ones who are talking economy and ecology in the same breath. That is what the Sanatan concept is all about. This is the message we are giving to the world, and we are the only country who is stretching our neck and out and saying 2070 we are carbon zero country. Name me one country who can come today and talk like that. And even before 2070, I can give you a word, the way we are doing it, we'll do it much before. 2070 is a worst case scenario for us, while as a neighbor China is at 26%. United States at 14%.
Absolutely. You make a point. And Ambassador Mukherjee, that reminds me of this controversy that had arisen in COP26 when the question was being raised about how India and China have retaliated, saying that it has to be the carbon emissions phasing down and not phasing out. And therefore also in terms of the conjectures that had been raised by the West, talking about how there needs to be an appropriation of when is it that India will achieve its net zero targets? 2070 is what India at this point of time has targeted to achieve. China has something similar in place, but the West continuing to persuade the global South, like I said, and the two important nations in South Asia to reduce the duration of the time when these net zero targets are going to be achieved.
Well, this kind of pressure will continue. I don't see either India or China succumbing to such pressure. The point here is that the West has not done much to meet their own targets, and focusing on India and China, which I may remind you, Megha, are both colonized countries, both the victims of colonization, is counterproductive. As far as India is concerned, as I said, we've taken the onus on ourselves without the assistance that was promised to us. changing over to green technology is an expensive process. It also involves taking the public with you, and it also involves moving to sometimes a more expensive form of technology, which might make your goods and services more expensive and therefore more difficult to export. So it's done over a period of time. We have tried to compress the timetables. I don't think anybody can accuse India of not doing its best. I don't see too much of pressure being put on us. I think that we would take a leadership role. As far as China is concerned, their emissions are far higher than us. It is for the Chinese to decide how they should handle this issue. But certainly, as far as both India and China are concerned, on this particular issue, we happen to be victims of colonial powers who were in the first instance responsible for the climate change crisis. And they must take responsibility and they must reduce their emissions and they must give assistance to other countries so that they can make the transition to clean energy faster, quicker, but in a manner in which their development is not impeded, their economies are not pushed backwards, and their people can continue to come out of poverty. That is the minimum that developing countries demand out of the developed countries. On this.
Okay, Naresh, then a quick word from you. And we were doing this campaign on our news channel talking about the EV-thon and how Delhi needs to take the onus of completely transforming into an electric vehicle city, an electric vehicle state, and thereby have a trickle effect on the rest of the nation. And we were giving out examples of how there need to be this large infrastructure that needs to be put up, how there have to be the government impetus policies that need to be changed, how there is at this point of time, by 2025, if the Delhi government is saying that we are going to achieve the target of having 10,000 buses that are going to be electric, perhaps, advance those time durations so as to give this massive push that is required in the direction. Until and unless pressure is imposed, obviously things become lackadaisical. So how can cities and state governments and the central government come together in turning India electric? And how important does the infrastructure and obviously what do you require in terms of raw materials, whether it is setting up those semiconductor facilities in our country, or for that matter having these lithium reserves and having these manufacturing units that are going to then turn lithium reserves into what is required for our smartphones and what is required for our electric vehicles. How do they work in conjunction with each other to allow for this parallel transformation for India to happen and thereby achieving its net zero goals by 2070?
Okay, Megha, it's an interesting question. As far as government is concerned, if you recall a few years ago, our Surface Transport Ministry, I'm Minister, had actually tried to propose an early phasing out of the fossil fuel vehicles, which was resisted. So therefore, as far as government vision is concerned in this context, I believe it is already on course. There are two interesting things which I would like to mention here. One is that the location of the present COP28 there and involvement of fossil fuel industry in this. It will be interesting to see whether there is any outcome in context with that. And the second aspect is that as we are transitioning to, let us say, the electric energy regime in transport sector, the effect of that in a very large scale. Supposing today you have, 10 million vehicles and all become electric. How that is going to be tackled in terms of the waste disposal of that industry, other than, of course, the resource needed for that. There is very scant data on that. I believe that the transition, extremely sudden transition, is also not very maintainable and could lead to a different kind of problem. So,
Right. But okay, fantastic. Great to have had a conversation with all of you regarding this subject. We'll keep a focus on what is happening in terms of the other three speeches in the remaining part of the day today that the Prime Minister is going to make in terms of what India has been able to achieve, what India's goals are in the upcoming period, 2030 being the closest in terms of carbon emissions that are going to be reduced even further down to less than 4%, and how India looks forward to then leading the path for the rest of the world to follow when it comes to the world's net zero targets.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.